Single dad waiter ignored the billionaire CEO in line until she whispered, "You're her father." It happened on an ordinary morning. Sunlight spilling through cafe windows, the scent of fresh bread in the air. A single father behind the counter, a billionaire CEO in line. No one could have guessed that by the end of that day, 2 lives and 1 forgotten truth would change forever. Ethan Cole moved like a man who'd learned to survive on routine. Every morning at 6 a.m., he opened the small cafe on Maple Street, a cozy corner shop that smelled of espresso and warm muffins. He wasn't rich or famous or even noticed much, but he was steady. The regulars liked him for that. He remembered their orders, their birthdays, even the names of their dogs. "Flat white, no sugar, right?" he'd say with a quiet smile, and they'd nod, grateful for the small kindnesses of a man who listened more than he spoke. Behind the counter, Ethan wore a simple black apron, sleeves rolled up, hair a little too long at the sides. His hands, once calloused from construction work, now carried trays and coffee cups with surprising gentleness. He lived alone with his 6-year-old daughter, Mia. She was the center of his world. Every drawing on the cafe wall was hers, crayon suns, stick figures holding hands, messy hearts with Dad plus me written underneath. He'd hung them beside the menu board, ignoring anyone who said it didn't look professional. Mia came by after school most days, sitting at the corner table with her backpack and a cup of warm milk. While Ethan worked, she'd hum little tunes, her feet swinging above the floor, waiting for him to finish. She didn't know the full story, how her mother had left when she was only a baby, or why her father sometimes stared too long at the window when the light turned gold. To most, he was just another small-town waiter. But there was something in Ethan's eyes, a quiet weight, as if every smile carried a memory he didn't dare unpack. That morning, as he flipped the open sign, he didn't know the universe had just started moving the pieces, and that somewhere across the city, a woman in a glass tower had already circled his name. Isabelle Reed didn't wait in lines. She didn't have to. At 39, she was one of the youngest self-made billionaires in the country, founder of a global tech company that built AI systems for logistics and healthcare. Her name was whispered in boardrooms and printed in magazines. But success, she'd learned, was a lonely currency. The higher she climbed, the thinner the air became. Her mornings were a blur of assistants, conference calls, and drivers holding car doors. She lived in a world of tinted glass and controlled climates, where silence was expensive and emotions were inconvenient. Only when she looked out from her office window did she remember that before all this, she'd once been someone else. Before power, before headlines, before she made a choice that still haunted her. There was a photograph on her desk, faded, soft at the edges. A younger Isabelle, her hair tied back, smiling beside another woman. That woman's name was Hannah Miller, her best friend, her secret heartbreak. She'd kept that photo hidden for years. But last week, while sorting old storage files, Isabelle had found something she wasn't meant to find. An envelope, sealed and marked in Hannah's handwriting. Inside were a few hospital papers, a birth certificate, and a name she hadn't expected to see. Father, Ethan Cole. Her hands had trembled as she read it again. Hannah had never told him. She'd disappeared before the baby was born. A tragic accident soon after delivery had taken her life. And Isabelle, left with grief and guilt, had done the only thing she could. Made sure the child was placed safely in the adoption system. That was 6 years ago. And now a letter, hidden all this time, told Isabelle something that made her chest tighten. If he ever asks, tell him the truth. Tell him about our daughter. That night, Isabelle couldn't sleep. The next morning, she asked her driver to change her route. To Maple Street, she said softly. To the cafe. The cafe was busier than usual that morning, the hum of chatter mixing with the hiss of steaming milk. Ethan worked the counter, his focus steady, voice calm. He didn't notice the sleek black car pull up outside or the woman stepping out in a tailored coat, worth more than his yearly rent. When Isabelle entered, the doorbell chimed softly. Heads turned, not because anyone recognized her, but because she carried recognition, confidence, stillness, the kind that comes from years of command. She looked around once, her eyes scanning the room, then fixed on him, the man behind the counter. He didn't look up right away. Just another customer, she thought. But when he finally did, something in her chest stilled. Those eyes, tired but kind, familiar in a way that made her throat tighten. She stepped forward, cutting ahead of the small line near the counter. "Excuse me," she said, her tone clipped but polite. "I just need a quick coffee to go." Ethan didn't even glance at her clothes or tone. He simply said, "I'm sorry, ma'am. You'll need to wait in line." The cafe went quiet for a heartbeat. A businessman halfway through his latte froze mid-sip. Someone whispered, "Did he jest?" Ethan stayed calm, returning to the customer ahead of her with the same quiet patience. Isabelle blinked, surprised. People didn't tell her to wait. Not in boardrooms, not in airports, not anywhere. But there was something disarming about his steadiness, not arrogance, just dignity. So she waited. When her turn came, she stepped forward again. Black coffee. No sugar. Their hands brushed briefly when he handed her the cup, and something passed between them. A flicker of something unspoken. Recognition that neither could name. As she turned to leave, she hesitated. Then, leaning close, her voice barely a whisper, she said the words she'd rehearsed 100 times in her head. "You're her father." The cup slipped from his hand, splashing across the counter. For a full 10 seconds, Ethan didn't move. The sound of coffee dripping from the counter filled the silence, the liquid pooling dark against the wood. His lips parted, but no words came. He stared at her, this elegant stranger with eyes like winter, and wondered if he'd heard her wrong. What did you just say?" Isabelle didn't flinch. Her voice was quiet, steady, but beneath it a tremor. "I said you're her father." The cafe seemed to fold inward. A chair scraped somewhere, but even that sound felt distant. Ethan's hands trembled. He looked around as if expecting a cruel joke, a hidden camera, something to explain the absurdity of it. "I think you've made a mistake," he said finally. "My daughter's name is Mia. She's 6. "I know," Isabelle whispered. "But that's not the girl I'm talking about." Ethan's heartbeat turned uneven. "Then who?" Isabelle's jaw tightened. "Not here. Please." For the first time, he noticed a slight tremor in her hand as she reached into her bag, sliding a small white card across the counter. Isabelle read, "CEO Nova Systems. Come to this address tomorrow at 10, she said. "It's about Hannah Miller." The name hit him like a punch. Hannah. He hadn't heard it in years. By the time he looked up, Isabelle was already walking toward the door. The bell rang once more, and she was gone. He stood there for a long moment, breathing hard, the world spinning around him. The noise of the cafe slowly returned, conversations, laughter, cups clinking, as if the world hadn't just cracked open. That night, after he put Mia to bed, Ethan sat in the dark with the card in his hand. The letters seemed to glow in the lamplight, unreal and cold. Hannah Miller, a name he'd buried under time and regret. He remembered her laugh, the smell of rain on her hair, the day she left without goodbye, and the single message she'd sent before disappearing. "Don't look for me. It's safer this way." Now someone else had said her name, and claimed he had another child. The next morning, Ethan stood outside a glass tower that stretched into the clouds. He felt small, like a man who'd stepped out of a story that didn't belong to him. Inside, polished marble floors reflected the ceiling lights. Every sound echoed, footsteps, whispers, his own heartbeat. He clutched Isabelle's card tighter than he meant to. The receptionist looked up, polite but cautious. "Can I help you, sir?" I'm here to see Isabelle Reed." "Do you have an appointment?" Before he could answer, a voice came from behind. "It's all right, he's with me." Isabelle stood near the elevator, dressed in soft gray instead of corporate black. No makeup this time. No armor. Just tired eyes and something fragile in her face. They rode up in silence. The city spread beneath them, endless and bright, but Ethan only saw reflections of choices, of time, of ghosts. Her office was nothing like he imagined. There were plants, sunlight, books instead of awards. On her desk sat the photo. Hannah and Isabelle, arms around each other, laughing at something unseen. Ethan stopped in his tracks. "That's her." Isabelle nodded slowly. "We were friends. Since college. She was family." He stared at the photo as if it could breathe. What happened to her? Isabelle's throat worked before words came. She was in an accident. 6 years ago. She didn't survive the birth. Ethan felt the floor tilt beneath him. The birth? Isabelle stepped forward, her voice barely above a whisper. She had a baby, Ethan. A girl. He blinked. The words didn't fit. No, she never told me. She wanted to, Isabelle said, tears gathering. But you'd already left for the oil fields. She didn't know how to reach you. By the time she tried. Her voice cracked. There wasn't time. He pressed a hand to his mouth, breath shallow. She made me promise to keep her safe. To find her a home. I thought I was doing what you wanted. Ethan's voice was hollow. Where is she now? Isabelle hesitated, then said softly, She's alive. Her name is Grace. Isabelle walked to a wooden drawer in her desk, one she'd clearly opened 1,000 times and hated every second of it. From inside, she pulled a photograph and handed it to him with trembling fingers. The image was of a little girl in a pink raincoat, her curly brown hair sticking to her cheeks as she laughed up at falling snow. She's beautiful, Ethan whispered. She's 6 now, Isabelle said. Lives with a foster family just outside the city. They don't know who you are. They don't even know I check in from a distance. He traced the photo as if it might dissolve. She has Hannah's smile. And your eyes, Isabelle said quietly. That's how I knew it was time. She's starting to ask questions about where she came from. He swallowed hard. You could have told me years ago. I wanted to, Isabelle said, her voice shaking. But I didn't even know where you were. You disappeared after Hannah's death. The system moved quickly. Adoption papers, medical reports, everything sealed. Ethan's gaze hardened. You had power. Connections. You could have found me. Her eyes filled with tears. I was drowning in guilt. I couldn't face you. I told myself it was mercy, that you were better off not knowing. Ethan turned away, his reflection fragmented in the window. Outside, the city kept moving, cars, lights, lives, none of them stopping for grief. He pressed his forehead to the glass. All this time, I thought losing Hannah was the worst thing that could happen to me. But knowing she died thinking I'd never care, that's worse. A long silence hung between them. Finally, Isabelle said, If you want to meet her, I can make it happen. But it has to be careful, gradual. She doesn't know about you. To her, Hannah's just a story her foster mother tells when she can't sleep. Ethan nodded faintly. Just tell me when. I'll wait. When he turned to leave, Isabelle spoke again. She looks for you, you know. Every time she sees a man with your eyes, she stares a little longer. Her voice cracked. She feels what she's never been told. 3 days later, Ethan found himself standing across the street from a public park on the city's west side. It was early afternoon. Children laughed on the swings, leaves scattered like confetti on the wind. In his hand was the photograph Isabelle had given him. He didn't know why he came, only that something stronger than reason had pulled him here. And then he saw her, a little girl in a yellow jacket, chasing bubbles near the fountain. The sunlight caught her hair, turning it to gold. When she laughed, the sound cut through everything. Traffic, voices, even time. Grace. His knees almost buckled. Every instinct screamed to run to her, to kneel down, to say I'm here. But he stayed where he was, frozen in the shadow of a tree, afraid that even one wrong move could steal the moment away. A woman sat on a nearby bench, mid-30s, kind face, a book in her lap. The foster mother. She smiled as Grace ran to show her something, then hugged the little girl tight. There was love there, real, steady, unpretentious. Ethan's chest ached. He'd imagined this moment 1,000 ways, but none prepared him for the quiet truth of it. She didn't need him to exist. She was already loved. Still, when Grace turned suddenly and looked around, just for a second, her gaze landed right where he stood. She tilted her head, curious. He almost smiled. Then she waved a small, uncertain wave. As if greeting a stranger, she felt she somehow knew. He lifted his hand, returning it slowly. And that was enough. From the corner of the park, Isabelle watched. She'd been there the whole time, hidden behind tinted car glass. Her driver glanced at her in the mirror, waiting for instruction. She just whispered, "Not yet." Because even from a distance, she saw it, the connection neither of them could deny. And she knew, once they met, nothing would ever be the same again. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. Mia was curled up beside him, her small hand clutching his shirt. She'd had a nightmare earlier, something about Daddy disappearing. He held her close, guilt knotting in his chest. 2 daughters, one who knew him, one who didn't. He kept seeing Grace's face, the spark in her eyes, the way she'd waved. It was like seeing a piece of Hannah come alive again. He wanted to protect her, teach her, hold her hand through the years he'd missed. But every time he closed his eyes, he saw Mia too, her drawings on the cafe wall, her laughter echoing in the empty shop. He couldn't lose one to find the other. The next morning, he found Isabelle waiting outside the cafe. No car this time, just her, in a simple coat, holding 2 paper cups. "I figured you could use coffee," she said quietly. They sat on the bench outside, the early air crisp and pale. "I saw her," Ethan said finally. "At the park." Isabelle nodded. "I thought you might." She waved at me. His voice cracked. She didn't know why, but she did. Isabelle looked down, twisting the cup in her hands. "You know, I used to sit in that same park every week after she was placed, just to make sure she was smiling. I told myself I was being strong, letting go, but it never felt like strength." They sat in silence. Somewhere, a bus hissed to a stop. "Do you regret it?" Ethan asked softly. She blinked, startled. "What? Giving her up?" Isabelle exhaled slowly. "Every single day. But I promised Hannah I'd keep her safe. And at that time, I wasn't fit to raise a child. I thought love meant sacrifice." Ethan's eyes met hers. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it's just fear wearing a noble mask. Her eyes glistened. "Then maybe it's time we stop being afraid." For the first time, they shared a small, broken smile. 2 people stitched together by the same ghost. A week later, a thin envelope arrived at Ethan's cafe. No return address, only his name in careful handwriting. Inside was a single folded page. "Mr. Cole, my name is Margaret. I'm Grace's foster mother. Isabelle told me you might want to meet her. Grace doesn't know the full story yet, but she's curious. She's been drawing pictures of a man she's never met. I think she's ready. Would you come to the park this Sunday at 2 p.m.? Bring your daughter, if you'd like. Children understand things adults can't. Margaret." Ethan's hand shook as he read it. He felt both terrified and alive. He looked toward the counter. Mia was coloring with chalk on a napkin, humming softly. She looked up. "What's wrong, Daddy?" He smiled faintly. "Nothing, sweetheart. We might be meeting someone special soon." That Sunday, the sky was washed in silver clouds. He and Mia walked to the park hand in hand, her pink jacket zipped to her chin. When they arrived, Grace was already there, sitting cross-legged on the grass, building a tiny tower of leaves. Margaret stood a few feet away, talking quietly with Isabelle. Ethan stopped a few steps behind, his heart pounding. Grace looked up. Their eyes met again, longer this time. Mia, sensing something she didn't understand, tugged his sleeve. "Who's that, Daddy?" He knelt beside her. "Someone who might need a friend." Mia grinned, the kind of grin that had no walls in it. She ran across the grass before he could stop her and plopped down beside Grace. "Hi, I'm Mia. Want to build a taller one?" Grace giggled, nodding eagerly. Within minutes, the 2 were laughing like they'd always known each other. Ethan stood frozen, watching, trembling, breaking apart quietly from the inside, because in their laughter, he heard Hannah's voice again, soft, fearless, and full of life. And in that moment he realized, maybe love doesn't always come back through doors. Sometimes it returns through laughter, wearing the face of your child. The afternoon stretched slow and tender. The girls kept laughing, Mia and Grace, building towers of twigs, then tearing them down just to rebuild together. Margaret watched from a distance, arms folded, a knowing smile on her face. Isabelle stood beside her, her expression unreadable. Ethan could barely breathe. He took a cautious step closer. The air between them hummed with years unsaid. Go on, Margaret whispered. She's been waiting without knowing it. Ethan knelt down, close enough to smell the grass and hear Grace's soft breath. Hey there, he said gently. That's a pretty tall tower you've got. Grace looked up, her eyes curious. It keeps falling. He smiled. That's okay. The best ones always do. Makes us stronger builders. She giggled, a bright sound that hit him like sunlight. Are you Mia's dad? She asked suddenly. I am. She said I can borrow you for the day. He laughed, blinking fast to hide the tears. Then I'm all yours. They built together, all four hands working at once, tiny sticks and scattered laughter forming something sacred. When it toppled again, Grace gasped, then clapped. Let's build it again, Daddy. The words slipped out of her mouth naturally, like it had always belonged to him. Ethan froze. Isabelle, several steps away, covered her mouth as tears welled up. Margaret looked down, silently praying. Grace blinked. Did I say something wrong? He shook his head, voice trembling. No, sweetheart. You said something perfect. Behind them, Isabelle turned and walked toward the trees, breaking quietly. Rain had started to fall by the time Ethan found Isabelle near the park's edge. She stood beneath a street lamp, watching the water trace down her hands. You let it happen, he said softly. You let her call me that. She didn't turn, because she already knew. Somewhere inside, she's always known. He stepped closer. You could have told me from the start. Why wait? Her shoulders shook. Because I was scared, Ethan. Scared you'd hate me for what I did. What did you do? She turned then, eyes red. I wasn't just a friend to Hannah. I was supposed to protect her, too. That night, the accident, she called me first. I didn't answer. I was at an event, trying to impress people who never cared. If I'd picked up, she broke off. She might have lived, and Grace wouldn't have been left alone. Ethan stood there, the rain washing over both of them. She asked me to find you before she died, Isabelle whispered. But I couldn't. I thought I'd ruined everything. So when Grace was born, I gave her up, but I stayed close. I made sure she had a good home. Then one day, I saw you in that cafe, and you couldn't tell me. Her lip trembled. You looked happy. You had Mia. You were safe. I didn't want to break that. Ethan stared at her, years of anger, loss, and longing collapsing into something quieter. He took a deep breath. You didn't ruin everything, Isabelle. You gave her a life when I couldn't. She shook her head. No, Ethan. I took her from you. And before he could stop her, she whispered, almost breaking, She's your daughter. The words hung between them, louder than thunder. The rain became a downpour. People scattered for cover, but Ethan and Isabelle didn't move. He'd suspected, hoped, and feared, but hearing it tore through him. He sank to the bench, running both hands through his hair. I missed her whole life. She still needs you, Isabelle said. Now more than ever. He looked up. What about you? I'll step back, she said softly. This was never supposed to be my story. It was always yours and hers. But Ethan shook his head. No, you've carried her when I couldn't. You're part of her story too. Isabelle smiled through tears. You always say the right thing too late. At that, they both laughed brokenly, but real. Later that night, Ethan tucked Mia into bed. She blinked up at him. Daddy, is Grace coming again? Maybe, he said softly. Would you like that? Mia nodded. She's like me, but she's sad inside. He froze. Why do you think that? Because when we played, she kept looking at the clouds, like she was waiting for someone to come back. He kissed her forehead. Then maybe we'll help her stop waiting. When he stepped out, Isabelle was sitting by the counter, staring at the empty cafe chairs. I told Margaret, she said quietly. Grace knows you're her dad now. Ethan's heart stopped. And she smiled. Isabelle whispered. Then she said, I already knew. A week later, Grace and Margaret came to dinner at the cafe. It wasn't fancy, just warm soup, candles, and the smell of cinnamon bread. Mia had drawn a welcome sign that said, Our family table, in crooked letters. Grace ran straight to Ethan, wrapping her arms around his waist. Hi, Daddy. Every wall he'd ever built inside crumbled. He lifted her up, holding her close, feeling the heartbeat he'd missed for years. Isabelle stood nearby, silent, smiling faintly through tears. Margaret touched her shoulder gently. "You did right by her," she whispered. "Did I?" Isabelle murmured. "Or did I just delay her happiness?" Sometimes love's timing isn't wrong. It's just slower than we wish. Dinner was filled with laughter and clinking spoons. Mia showed Grace a room upstairs, where she'd already made space for her drawings. Afterward, Ethan tucked both girls in, one on each side of him. "Story time," Mia asked. He smiled. "Once upon a time," he began, "there was a man who thought his life was small. But one day, a girl called him Daddy, and suddenly, his world became huge." Grace grinned sleepily. "That's a good story." "It's true," he said quietly. Outside the cafe, Isabelle stood watching through the window. For the first time in years, she didn't feel haunted, just full and free. Weeks passed. The cafe became a little louder, the mornings a little brighter. Ethan's world was now two giggling girls, endless drawings, and Isabelle's quiet companionship. But one evening, as the sky blushed orange, Isabelle handed him an envelope. "I'm leaving," she said softly. He stared. "What?" "I've been offered a position overseas. A new start. Grace has both of you now. My work here is done." He felt something twist in his chest. "You don't have to go." She smiled faintly. "If I stay, I'll keep trying to fix things that are already whole." Grace came running, clutching a small box. "Miss Isabelle, don't forget this." Inside was a drawing, all of them together, hand in hand. Above, Grace had written, "Family isn't who stays. It's who shows up when it matters." Isabelle pressed a hand to her mouth, tears spilling freely now. She knelt and hugged the girl tight. "I'll always show up for you, Gracie, even from far away." Ethan watched, gratitude and sorrow tangled in his throat. When she turned to go, he said softly, "For what it's worth, I don't think Hannah would have blamed you." Isabelle smiled through tears. "Maybe not, but I finally stopped blaming myself." Months later, the cafe was busier than ever. Mia and Grace had turned it into their playground, laughter spilling between customers and the smell of cinnamon always in the air. One afternoon, a woman in a business suit came in, unfamiliar, confident, her hair tied neatly back. Ethan looked up from the counter and froze. "Isabelle." She smiled softly. "Just passing through. Thought I'd see if the coffee's still terrible." He laughed, shaking his head. "Still too strong." They sat by the window, sunlight pooling between them. Grace and Mia were playing in the corner, pretending to serve imaginary customers. Isabelle leaned forward. "She's happy, you know." "I can see that," he said. "You did that." "No," she said quietly. "We did." For a while, they sat in silence. Then Isabelle reached into her bag and placed something on the table, a photograph. It was Hannah, holding newborn Grace, taken the night she was born. On the back, in faded ink, "If she ever wonders who her father is, tell her he's the man who never stopped loving her." Ethan's eyes filled. Isabelle leaned closer, her voice trembling. "I never told her who you were that first day in the cafe, but when she asked me later, I whispered it." He looked up. "What did you tell her?" Her eyes shimmered. "I told her you're her father." Ethan's breath caught. He looked across the cafe, at Grace's laughter, Mia's joy, the sunlight that filled every corner, and for the first time, his heart felt complete. When he looked back, Isabelle was already standing. "Goodbye, Ethan." He smiled softly. "Not goodbye. Just see you when you show up again." As she stepped out into the afternoon light, Grace's voice echoed from the counter. "Daddy, we saved you a cookie." He turned, smiling through tears. Sometimes, love doesn't arrive when you expect it. It arrives late, messy, broken, beautiful. But it arrives. And when it does, it changes everything. Sometimes life doesn't give us perfect beginnings. It gives us second chances, disguised as strangers, whispers, and moments that don't make sense until they do. Ethan didn't find love in a grand gesture or a miracle. He found it in small things, a child's laughter, a rebuilt cafe, a woman brave enough to tell the truth. And when Isabelle whispered, You're her father. She wasn't just telling him who he was. She was reminding him that love, the real kind, never leaves. It just waits, quietly, until we're ready to listen. Music swells softly, gentle, hopeful tone. If this story touched your heart, take a deep breath and remember, somewhere out there, someone's waiting for their second chance too. And maybe, just maybe, it's you.